Creatine, easily the single most effective supplement on the market today. There is no question about this. You take creatine and you get bigger and you get stronger. You also go bald, experience kidney failure, cramp up, and the worst of it, you get fat. At least that's what some like to claim. Is it true? Is creatine actually bad for you? Dan doesn't think so, but he'll have this belief tested today. He had just finished up his training session and, per usual, stopped at the gym's cafe and ordered himself a nice big post-workout protein shake. He was going down the menu. Chunky Monkey, Peanut Paradise, Banana Rama. That Peanut Paradise sounded good. Oh, and could you add a scoop of creatine, please? Dan asked. Out of nowhere, a piece of unsolicited advice came from across the bar. I wouldn't do that if I were you. One of his fellow gym members, Alex, had just offered his opinion to Dan, insinuating that adding creatine to his shake was a bad idea. Did you know that creatine is actually bad for you? There have been a bunch of studies to show it's not good for your body and causes serious health issues. Dan had heard rumors of so-called negative side effects but had always ignored them. It seems that everything was bad for him these days. He had once heard that even protein powder was bad for him. He was pretty well read and believed that creatine was the most effective supplement on the market. How could it also be bad for him? At the same time, he didn't want to put anything in his body if it was going to cause him harm. So when he was done with his workout, why not look into these claims a bit more? Dan bit and asked the gym member what he was talking about. What Dan had just done was set himself up to hear a barrage of claims of how creatine is going to affect his health. Before they get into it, it's important to understand what creatine is, to understand if it's safe or not. There's something very important that you need to know. Are you ready? This may be a shock for you, but right now as you watch this video, every single person on Earth as we speak has creatine coursing through their veins. Well, actually it's stored in their muscles, but still, it's already inside all of us. There is a common misconception that creatine is some foreign substance that you are injecting into your body, like a drug, a steroid. While creatine found in supplements is technically made in a lab, it is the exact same found naturally in your body. So first off, creatine is a natural compound that is essential to support life in humans and many animals. Dan felt better knowing this as he actually wasn't really sure where or what creatine was. But if he has it in him, how did it get there? There are two ways Dan's creatine stores are filled naturally. The first is by consuming it through his diet. However, it's only found in animal products, with the best sources being red meat and certain fish. Wait a minute, Dan's best friend is a vegan. How does he get creatine? Well, vegans actually have lower creatine levels because of this. Their body must rely on the alternative means of supplying creatine through the synthesis of the three amino acids glycine, arginine, and methionine. This begs the question, if creatine is natural, then why do we even need to supplement with it? Diet significantly impacts creatine levels. For example, vegans tend to have lower creatine levels due to the lack of animal products in their diet. While there is a finite amount, most people are only walking around with their creatine storage only 60 to 80% full. Therefore, when we take supplemental creatine, we are simply filling up our stores to 100%. It's like stopping at the gas station to fill up the gas tank before a long road trip. That's it. Many people, probably Alex, like to dismiss creatine and say things like, "It just gives you a little bit of energy." Creatine does not just give the body a little bit of energy. When framed like this, it makes it sound as if creatine is a stimulant, like caffeine. Nope, creatine contributes energy that is vital for muscle movements. That's like saying that coal just gives a train a little bit of energy, when in fact the train would stop moving without it. This is similar to creatine. Your body requires the presence of a compound known as ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, to provide energy to drive muscle contractions. When required, a phosphate compound will break off of ATP, which releases energy. However, ATP has now become a compound known as ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The problem is ADP cannot be broken down to provide energy anymore, so the body must replenish its stores of ATP. Your body has three methods to do this, depending on the need for more ATP and the intensity of exercise. One of these is the phosphagen system. The phosphagen system is used to provide energy during high-intensity activities such as weightlifting. It needs ATP fast, and it needs it now. Therefore, when Dan supplements with creatine, he's simply filling up his creatine stores. Once he gets in the gym, this will help him perform more work. He can knock out another rep or two or put on a little more weight. Over time, all of this extra work translates into bigger, stronger muscles. That didn't sound bad to Dan at all, so why are people so concerned with creatine supplementation? One word: case studies, yelled Alex. Look at this case study. In the scholarly world, a case study is a type of scientific paper that documents the occurrence of a singular person. For example, let's pretend a group of scientists are trying to research if a new candy bar makes you sick. A research study would look at all the people who eat that candy bar and document how many people get sick. They would then run their numbers and determine if there is a connection. On the other hand, a case study would find the one person who does get sick and document their experience. While we can learn a lot from case studies, we can't make a broad determination from them. For example, maybe only one person got sick after eating the candy bar out of the 1,000 people who ate it. That's 0.1% of the people, which is hardly convincing that you would get sick if you ate that candy bar. Well, this is the same scenario as what has happened with the use of creatine. There have been some rare occurrences where it seems as though a healthy person taking a recommended dosage of creatine has had medical issues. The most serious concern with creatine supplementation is that it can lead to acute kidney failure. Like most people against taking creatine, Alex claimed that the supplementation of creatine places a greater workload on the kidneys. Alex had been talking about a case study from 2011 that documented the events surrounding a healthy 18-year-old male who supplemented with creatine. He followed a normal protocol of taking 20 grams a day for 5 days and then just 1 gram a day for 6 weeks. Even though this is the prescribed protocol, he was admitted after vomiting, muscle tenderness, and stomachache for 2 days. He was experiencing acute renal failure and had serum creatinine levels twice the normal range. Following treatment, including IV therapy, he was discharged from the hospital in good health 25 days later. Dan had never heard of this and was a bit taken back at first, and rightfully so. He should be aware of any risk, no matter how small, that's involved with putting anything in his body. The secret is not to exaggerate the risk. Dan wanted to read the study himself and found some very interesting statements. For example, in the study it says, extensive research over the past decade has shown that oral creatine supplementation appears to be safe when used by healthy adults at recommended loading, and the potential side effect of creatine supplementation, kidney damage, was based on case reports only and was associated especially with high doses of creatine supplementation or renal disease. This basically means that when there are a small number of adverse reactions, it usually occurs with those who already have renal disease or are taking more than recommended. For example, let's pretend you break your foot and then someone tells you to go for a mile walk. When you get back, you're going to be in crazy pain. But does that mean walking is bad for your foot? Of course not. It means walking is bad when your foot is already broken. And this is what this case study ultimately concludes. In fact, the case study even linked to 3 reviews that also state this. For example, in 2000, a review appropriately titled Adverse Effects of Creatine Supplementation, Fact or Fiction was released. This review brought together numerous studies ranging from 4 weeks to 5 years. They too conclude that apart from anecdotal reports and case studies that they believe that there is no evidence for deleterious effects in healthy individuals. Okay, so Dan felt pretty good about his kidneys. But then Alex warned Dan that if he kept taking creatine, he was going to go bald. As Alex was getting older, he was a bit worried about his hairline. Balding is definitely one of the biggest cosmetic concerns that men face as they age. His dad and grandpa are bald, so he figured it will be his time soon enough. However, he'd like to postpone it as much as possible. It just so happens that balding is one of the potential side effects. Not necessarily dangerous, but it's actually the one adverse effect that worried him. This claim first formed from a study back in 2009 with a study using male college rugby players. After finishing a typical 3-week protocol, the players' DHT levels were found to be significantly higher above baseline. DHT is a metabolite of testosterone and can bind to androgen receptors in hair follicles, causing them to shrink and eventually stop growing. While this seems like a close and shut case, it's not so clear. Further, no study since has replicated these results. It appears that this concern is yet another result of a study having its results exaggerated and spread around as fact. Dan thought he was out of the woods, as it seems that these claims about creatine seem to be the result of exaggerated claims. But Alex had a lot of issues with creatine. He had a few more concerns he felt needed to be addressed. The next issue was that of cramping and dehydration. Alex pointed to a study from 2000 that looked at creatine use in college athletes. In this study, a large group of athletes from different sports were provided with a self-reported survey on their use of creatine and any side effects. In one group, 38% reported muscle cramping. In yet another group of athletes, another 25% reported cramping and 14% reported symptoms of dehydration. The theory is due to creatine's osmotic properties. That means it draws in water. This is actually cause for another concern which will be brought up in a bit. So the theory is that creatine is held in the muscle and draws in water. However, even during times of overheating, creatine retains the water and prevents it from being distributed to cool the body down. Sounds bad, Dan thought. So he went ahead and took a look at the study himself, and he's glad he did. He found that 91% of the participants were taking more than the recommended dose. At the same time, as this was a self-reported survey, it could not control other variables such as nutrition, sleep, hydration status, or even the use of other supplements. While Dan found it interesting, he knew this contradicted other studies he had read. One study had college-aged football players consume either creatine or a placebo for 120 days. Researchers monitored the players and documented adverse events. More importantly, they controlled the dosing of creatine. Ultimately, the researchers found the exact opposite happened. The creatine users reported significantly less cramping, muscle tightness, muscle strains, heat injury. They basically had fewer total reported symptoms. For a cherry on top, Dan actually knew another later study that even suggests creatine use offers benefits when training in hot and humid weather. But Alex wasn't done yet. Alex then told Dan that creatine would mess up his stomach. If Dan is going to experience any adverse effect, it would likely be this: stomach distress. This is most common in users during the loading phase. During the loading phase, you take significantly more creatine than normal, 20 to 25 grams a day. However, there's a few positives. For one, this is temporary and usually recedes once you start taking your maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams. At the same time, if you tend to be sensitive to stomach issues, you can divert this whole issue and just take smaller doses. For example, during your loading phase, simply take 10 grams for 10 to 14 days. You could even take 5 grams a day, but know it will take 30 days to fill your creatine stores. Dan could also split the loading doses into several smaller doses during the day. In fact, you should. Don't take all 20 grams at once. Rather, you could take 4 grams 5 times a day. In most incidents where these minor issues did arise, improper use was a major factor. Further, the effects subsided after lowering the dose. Dan decided that this could be an issue, but it doesn't seem very serious, and the possible benefits of taking creatine were just too great. Therefore, he decided he would just split the doses up throughout the day during the loading phase and be mindful. If he started to feel some issues arising, he would just limit his dose. Alex was looking heavily depleted, just like his muscles, as he hasn't been taking his creatine. But he wasn't going to give up. He had to prove that creatine wasn't really good for you, so he pulled out one of the most common misconceptions and confusion surrounding creatine. But even if you take creatine, you don't really build muscles, it's just water weight. It can actually make you fat. The claim that creatine leads to water retention is one of the more prominent claims made, partially because there's some truth to it. However, even though there's a grain of truth, it's heavily misinterpreted. Creatine is osmotic, meaning that it draws in water to its location. Remember that creatine is stored within muscle tissue, which means that creatine does draw water into the muscle. But here's the thing, that's a good thing. Dan's muscle is already 70% water, and hydration is crucial for optimal function. In fact, when his muscle is hydrated, it will be something known as cell swelling. And researchers have found that this creates an anabolic environment, or an environment that promotes muscle growth. Now, there's some truth that muscle will absorb water at a rate that's disproportional to the amount of growth. One large cause of this is due to the loading phase in which a large amount is taken. What's interesting is that if Dan or Alex supplement for an extended period of time, their muscle growth will increase, and the amount of water their muscles absorb will return to a normal ratio when compared to the extra muscle mass. So yes, Dan will probably take on more water with his creatine consumption, as he will also gain more muscle mass. Every single claim that Alex brought up was easily disputed by digging just a little bit farther into the research. And this is when Dan left the studies and used some logic. He explained to Alex that creatine is easily the most widely used and studied supplement in the world. In a study from 2003, it states that there have been over 500 studies that have evaluated the effects of creatine supplementation on sports performance in healthy subjects. And that was over 20 years ago. Now there are significantly more. If creatine was such a hazard to our health, you would think these studies would have picked up on that. Rather, they have found the opposite. Again, the majority of negative claims come from case studies or studies that use faulty methodologies. These negative occurrences are picked up by the media and then exaggerated. In reality, Dan explained that creatine is the closest thing we have to a miracle drug. Its effect on sports performance is undeniable, and that's a huge claim to make in the world of exercise science where there is so much nuance. Researchers have since gone beyond the use of creatine for sports performance and have found it has a multitude of possible benefits. This includes improving cognition, acting as a neuroprotector, protection against traumatic brain injury, treating neurodegenerative conditions such as Parkinson's, possibly helping improve mental health and treating depression. The list goes on. As Dan went ahead and dumped his serving of creatine in his Peanut Paradise post-workout shake, Alex too ordered a Peanut Paradise shake. "Do you want a serving of creatine?" the barista asked, sheepishly looking around. Yes, I think I do." Dan had done it. He was able to educate another naysayer of the awesome benefits found in creatine. So if you want to take creatine, follow these steps to mitigate any chance of an adverse effect. Even though the chance is already extremely low, decide if you want to partake in a loading phase. Generally, this is 20 to 25 grams of creatine taken daily for 5 to 7 days. If you think you may be sensitive, you could cut this in half and double the days taken. 10 grams a day for 14 days. Also remember that you should split this across multiple doses throughout the day. For example, take 5 grams 5 times a day. After this, simply take 3 to 5 grams a day. Further, take with a glass of water and increase your hydration throughout the day.